Welcome friends, welcome to the special lecture Symbolic Expression, and as sign language expert we have Manisha Sharma with us in the studio, and the topic of today's discussion is Hindi cinema and the feminist film theories. As we are aware that how film in cinema, especially in the Indian context, largely in the Hindi films, how women they have been portrayed in the films, that has been a subject of debate among some of the film theorists and scholars. And what we have found is that the patriarchal system of the society is one of the reasons that the way the women they have been portrayed in the Hindi films. And some thinkers, especially the feminist film theories, they have tried to, in a way, position the way women they have been portrayed in the Hindi films. Some of some of the scholars, especially in this context, are Ruby Rich, McKinnon, and we have found that how their ideas they have been discussed at different levels. And Laura Mulvey was one of the important feminist film theorists who, in a way, talked about the question of male gaze within the context of the films, and how they can be seen affecting the way films they are being produced as well. In the context of the readings, one can refer to Shomai Chatterjee, Subject Cinema, Object Women, a study of portrayal of women in Indian cinema. Laura Mulvey, Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, and Leo Brody and Marshall Cohen, Edited Film Theory and Criticism. E. N. Kaplan, Women and Films, Both Sides of Camera. Catherine McKinnon, Towards a Feminist Theory of State. So these are some of the readings which one can refer when one is talking about the various kinds of feminist film theories. And these scholars, they have tried to, in a way, position the portrayal or the depiction of women within the framework of certain theories. And these theories, they have been discussed and debated at different levels, and we find that when the Indian scholars they have tried to see the various schools which are talking about these kinds of theories, then Shomai Chatterjee, she has argued that since much of the Hindi cinema is influenced by the Hollywood from the mid-1950s, so the feminist analysis of the female characters in the Hindi film would fit more into the American school than the British school of the feminist film theory. And many times the scholars they have argued that why to apply the Western constructs of the feminist film criticism to the Indian ones, and we should have some kind of a theory which is more applicable in the Indian context. And when they talk about these kinds of aspects, they say that they are fine for offering the choices of the alternative school of thought and the guiding process of the feminist film research as well, and at the same time forming the frames of reference for the specific issues that are global in character. And we also see that how these constructs, these theories and these perspectives, they can neither be directly applied to, nor they can be superimposed on the Indian mainstream cinema's treatment and the portrayal of women. So one has to develop a mode of analysis that is cultural specific and situation specific as well. And we also find that how one can develop a new theory of such analysis against the backdrop of the Indian socio-economic backdrop within which real women live and work, and study these interactions or intersections of these with celluloid women in Indian cinema. So how the film theories, they in a way draw upon the psychoanalysis, semiology and structuralism, and they do not have much bearing on an analysis of the portrayal of women in Hindi cinema. This is how some of scholars they have tried to see the feminist film theories. And when you talk about the kind of approach which is there, then how women they are being represented on the celluloid, that is one of the main concerns. And how the women's issues they are being treated in cinema is one of the other concerns of the feminist approach. And another important aspect is that what does feminism mean to the filmmakers, and thereafter how does feminist agenda is manifest on screen as well. So these are some of the things apart from the way the women's character they are being positioned vis-a-vis the male character. And another important aspect is that what is of the women filmmakers and writers in depicting the women's issues through cinema. And what we have seen is that in the recent times, more women they have entered the filmmaking business, in that sense that in the context of the story writers or directors, producers, others in other fields as well, we find that more and more women they have started participating in the other kinds of aspects of filmmaking as well. And when you talk about these kinds of theories, we find that how the question of the objectification of women is also very, very important, and how the exclusion and the silence of women in cinematic narratives, they are also being discussed. We also see that how Laura Mulvey basically talks about the female characters and how these female characters they served as a spectacle to provide the pleasure to the male spectator through the gaze. So this idea of male gaze was in a way communicated by Laura Mulvey, and also it was also being talked about that how female characters they are being stereotyped in cinema. On the other hand, scholars they have also talked about that how culture is committed to the myths of the demarcated sex distinctions, which are known as masculine and feminine, and which in turn they revolve first on a complex gaze apparatus, and second on dominance, which is the dominance submission pattern. And this placing of the two sex genders in representation distinctly gives privilege to male through mechanisms of voyeurism and fetishism, and because his desires is backed by power or action, where women's desire they generally are not backed by that. So we find that how scholars, when they talk about such kinds of ideas, as we have seen that some of them they definitely talked about these issues. And it has also been argued that the technology of the film, it has also increased the power of male gaze in societies which are characterized by gender inequality, as has been argued by Laura Mulvey. And McKinnon, on the other hand, has talked about the male power and the authority, how they typically work by objectifying others, especially women, that how the objectification of women takes place. And we find that the popular cinema's most fundamental message about sexuality is that women exist for the pleasure of men. So these kinds of ideas, where the construction of sexuality is the chief element of the male dominance, and scholars like McKinnon they have argued that so many distinctive features of the women's status as the second class in a way are being portrayed, that the restrictions and the constraint and the contortion and the display, self-mutilation and the requisite presentations of self as a beautiful thing, and enforced passivity, that how women they are seen to be passive figures, and how they are in a way some sort of an appendage to men. All these kinds of things they could also be seen in that particular context. And scholars like McKinnon they have argued that the woman is identified as one whose sexuality exists for someone else, and the sexual objectification is the primary process of the subjection of women. And we find that how Hindi cinema also perpetuates this kind of a dominance by depicting women as existing to satisfy men. And this idea that women exist to please men may even legitimize men's use of force to ensure that women do please them. And Mulvey has argued that how films may also position women audience to gaze at screen images as well. And we also see that some recent works they have also studied women gazing at women and also men gazing at men. So scholars they have in a way talked about various kinds of aspects in the contemporary times, and how also the things they have changed over a period of time. That Laura Mulvey talked about that how for men cinema fulfills two contradictory urges: scopophilic urge to look at others and joyous narcissism of identifying with powerful figures on the screen as well. And E. Kaplan has talked about that men they do not simply look, their gaze carries with it power of action and of possession, which is lacking in the female gaze. So various scholars, they have tried to see these kinds of portrayals or depictions of women on the screen, and they've also talked about various kinds of theories, that how theories of presence and absence, they are concerned with the absence of a certain type of female characters in films, and the presence of other type which is influenced by the patriarchal values. And scholars like Ruby Rich, they have argued that for Mulvey, women is non-existent in the spectators who are perceived as male. And how can one formulate an understanding of a structure that insists on women's absence even in face of their presence? So how, despite women being present in cinema, despite how they are being positioned in cinema in that way, we find that many times, despite their presence, it is being generally seen that they are seen to be absent as well. And many of the stories, for example, in the films, if the characters or the women, if they are being reduced or if they are being removed also, not much change will come to these kinds of stories which are being told, because the structures are such that women are generally given a role of 25-30 minutes in a 3-hour or 2.5-hour film. So this basically is seen in many of the Hindi films as well. And we have found that the people, those who are attached with these theories, the people, those who are talking in the framework of the feminist theories, they talk about that in 1970s and early 80s, new kinds of forms which were to be created, and which tried to create an alternative cinema in which women were created as subjects, and which thus made possible female spectator position as well. So the problems confronting the feminist film theory is to contextualize and question the assumptions of social relations and the power structures in which women fail to fit. And when one talks about how women generally are seen in the films, then we find that there is a lot of stereotyping and unidimensional characters who are good or bad, white or black, and there are no shades of grey, which is how the women, they are being portrayed. And this kind of a dichotomy, it was reinforced in popular films which distinguished between heroine and vamp, wife and other women. So how women, they are being shown to be docile, domesticate, honorable, noble and ideal. So these kinds of picturizations or portrayals, they are there with regard to women. And on the other hand, we have other women, those who are on the other extreme, which are considered to be responsible in nature, those who are reckless, they are wayward. And so in this way, we find that this kind of a heroine and vamp, or a good woman or a bad woman kind of a positioning is there with regard to the portrayals of women. And largely, most of the films, that women, they are shown to be as an epitome of virtue. And we also find that how the patriarchal values of the society, they also try to convey that women, they have to be loyal and they have to be obedient towards their husbands. They also have to listen to their brothers and fathers. All of them, they have to listen within the family and even outside when they go out to work. So in that sense, the positioning of women is in that sense that how they are seen to be the passive figures. They are in that sense the submissive wives, and they are seen to be the perfect figures and martyrs for their own families in that sense. And some of the films also, they, even if we find that some of the films of the later times, for example Dahej in 1950, and we see other films like Pati Parmeshwar in 1988, and all these kinds of films, basically they are trying to communicate the ideals of the patriarchal society, and how these kinds of ideals of patriarchal society not only limited to men, but they are also in a way seen in many women as well, that women of the house, those who are elder, they also in a way imbibe the features or the characters of the patriarchal society, and they also in a way behave in that particular fashion, that they are no longer being seen as women, rather they are being seen as some kind of a patriarch though despite the fact that they are women in that sense. So we find that such kind of a transmission of values within the family or in the society is also reflective of a kind of a structure which is a patriarchal structure, and this structure is largely talking within the framework of the dominance of men, where women, they have to play some kind of a subservient role, not only in terms of taking any decisions, but also in the context of leading their lives as well. So we find that in spite of any kind of a problem which is being existing, and how women, they are being treated, we find that they are not ready to leave their husbands, and despite that they are being treated in a very bad manner in the framework of the physical and the emotional violence which is perpetrated on them, and but they feel that they do not have to leave their house or their marital home, in which they will only leave once they will die. So with this also is also being perpetuated by the Indian traditions and symbols like Doli, palanquin and Arthi, funeral pyre. So we find that how these ideals of Doli and Arthi, where a woman has to enter her husband's house in a palanquin and she has to go out of that house in Arthi, and so these kinds of things, they are also being communicated in the society, how women, they are being conditioned in the family, they are being conditioned in the society in such a manner that many a times they are being told that they have that kind of a freedom in the society, but at the same time they also realize that this freedom is restricted in nature. This freedom is in a way controlled by others. They have to conform to the kind of rules which have been framed within the family or the society, and these rules, they are being communicated to them through either through the parents or through the society as well, that how the women, they have to behave in the society in a certain way, and any kind of actions which are not in consonance with the rules of the society or the family, then they are being looked upon by others, and the women, they are being in a way told that they have to mend their ways so that they become fit for the society and family. So when you talk about the various kinds of films which have been made over a period of time, we find that how the Hindi cinema is largely male dominated and male centric, and how themes they have been explored from the point of view of the male audience as well, and how women or the heroine is secondary to hero, and we find that she does not have any kind of independent existence, and her journey throughout the film is explored in relation to the male characters. So such kind of a subservience or such kind of an attitude where women, they are not being shown as prominent figures, where the stories are not revolving within the framework of the women. Rather, the focus of the stories is on male characters, and women, they are generally being shown or being taken in the film to provide some kind of a relief to the audience in that sense. As Laura Mulvey talked about the issue of the male gaze, that how male gaze is an important concern in the film, and how the male gaze functions not only within that particular film, but in the framework of the society as well. So we find that how these kinds of portrayals, they only relate to some kind of an entertainment or glamour or the relief which is to be provided by the women, and how men, they are seen to be saviors, and how women, they are seen to be some kind of a damsel in distress, and how she is seen to be some kind of a victim, and who is to be in a way rescued by hero in some way when she is in trouble. And so in that sense, we find that the women of substance are generally missing from many of the portrayals, and where women, those who can lead their own life independently, and those who can take their own decisions, they are not being shown on the screen. And women, those who are in a way dependent on the males, they are generally shown on the screen as well. So such kinds of portrayals within the Hindi cinema or Indian cinema have been shown time and again, and women, they are also in a way told that they have to follow those kinds of laws, those kinds of rules which have been made in the society. And we see that the focus of the people, those who are there in the family as brothers or husbands or fathers, or the people those who are even outside, all of them, the focus of the male is in a way to bring women to some kind of subjection when they are dealing with them. So all these kinds of issues, they have been seen time and again in the films which have been made in Hindi and in other languages as well. So we will discuss further about other aspects when we will talk in the other lecture. Thank you very much.